to Skype. We didn't have to cancel, so I'm glad we could keep moving forward. I'm Anna Greco, the Director of Education at the Greenwich Historical Society, and I'm thrilled to see so many people interested in preserving their family histories. Preservation is an important piece of the work that we do, being the stewards of historic Bush Holly House and the home of an extensive archives and collection dedicated to the preservation of Greenwich. And it's actually quite frequently that sort of these private preservation projects do help us with our exhibitions, find their way into our collection. And so it's just really exciting to be a part of a program that's bringing it full circle. I just want to call your attention to one upcoming event on March 16th. Keith Stokes, the Vice President of the 1698 Heritage Group in Newport, Rhode Island. He will be coming to talk about God's Little Acre. It'll actually be another Zoom event. And this is the oldest and largest existing enslaved and free African burial ground. He will discuss how the preservation of the cemetery has impacted the interpretation of Newport's history. And for anyone who's interested and passionate about preservation, archives, and genealogy, it'll be a very insightful and interesting program. But tonight, we are thrilled to have Margot Note. She has 20 years of experience in information work in the national and international sectors. She's a certified archivist, a certified records manager, an information governance professional, and a project management professional. She has authored 7 books, including the inspiration for tonight's event, Creating Family Archives, a step-by-step guide for saving your memories for future generations. And she teaches in the Women's History program at Sarah Lawrence College and the Library and Information Science program at St. John's University. She received her Master's of Arts in Women's History from Sarah Lawrence College and holds a Master's in Library and Information Science and Postmasters in Archives and Records Management from Drexel University. She's here tonight to provide insight and guidance to creating your own family archives. And we will have time for questions at the end of the program. So we do ask that during your presentation, you stay muted. And if you do have questions, you can submit them through the chat. But there'll be plenty of time to address all those questions at the end. So now I'm going to hand it over to Margot. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. It's really a pleasure to be here tonight to talk about one of my favorite subjects, creating family archives. And this is, really near and dear to me because I'm an archival consultant. I work with organizations and also private clients that have specifically family archives. So let me change my, okay. Yes, so our focus tonight is thinking about preserving memories and experiences. And I think the guiding principle is that the question is, what can you do that fills you up and fits into your life? The idea is that I'm going to give you some guidance about what professional archivists do, but obviously you don't have the facilities, the climate controlled buildings, or a full-time archivist at your disposal. But a lot of what we're talking about today has been used in archives and museums around the world, and we can bring that expertise to your home collections. And I think the question that's really guiding today's topic is, if we don't save it, who will? This is incredibly important when we look back at our lives. We see the influence that other people have had on our own lives. The materials that we've collected on our own too is important. And we have to do the work to actively preserve these materials. So everyone has stuff, and stuff is the non-technical term for what we're talking about. It's stuff that's created, so things that you've generated in your lifetime, journals, postcards, letters, photographs, digital files, VHS tapes, whatever you might have. There's material that's also inherited, so family items that someone has passed away and you've received the materials and you have to sort them out. And then also material that's been gathered. And this is primarily for people that are genealogists that have collected digital files, physical files related to their family history and have gathered them in one place and are looking for how to organize everything. So before we continue, I want to define by, what I mean by archives and archival material. So these materials are usually original. They're one of a kind. If you were to lose your grandparents' love letters, you would not be able to replace them. They have enduring value. So archivists love to use the phrase records of enduring value. So what that means is something was originally created, and then over time it has historical significance. So for example, I always use the example, I have a beautiful Tiffany's locket, and inside of it I have basically like a ticket that I got when me and my husband went to City Hall in New York to get our marriage license. And it's like, it just looks like a deli ticket that you would have. Well, that ticket in itself just served the purpose of, greasing the wheels of bureaucracy, right? It had that one moment that the ticket number was called, we went and signed some documents. But that ticket has enduring value because it has a romantic value, sentimental value, and that's why I've kept it over time. I haven't thrown it away. And that's that shifting idea of enduring value of materials. Archival material is not necessarily old, though a lot of it can be. So if you have documents related to your grandparents, great-grandparents, those are old documents, but you could create something today that has archival value. It could be a Word document, it could be a memoir that you're writing on your computer. So archival material does not have to be old, and I really want to break that stereotype of kind of the dusty old archives that we think about. Archival material also relies on context for meaning. So it's not just one item, it's one item within a context of other things. We always think about materials as a group, not an individual thing. So it's not just a letter, it's correspondence over a period of years. And looking at that correspondence can give us some insight about the meaning of that particular letter. It's all about context. And of course, archival material can be in any format. It can be textiles, like dresses. It can be a spreadsheet that you have. It can be videos on YouTube that are important to you. It can be digital files on your like camera phone files, or it can be like, a document that's 200 years old. So family collections are unique because they're not necessarily like archival material that's in a repository like the Greenwich Historical Society. When you have a formal repository, there are deeds of gift, there are kind of a collection scope, there's things that you would take on as a repository and things that you wouldn't take on, and there's kind of some guidelines. Sometimes there's a board that approves of acquisitions. But family collections may be valuable only to you, and they're a mix that's gathered over time. So there's no real, if you want to collect something that just seems bizarre to anyone else, it's perfectly fine. So I think there's some flexibility in the rules of keeping materials with family collections. So why organize? There's many different reasons. One is to distribute to family members. So let's say you're thinking about your legacy, you would like to have family members carry on this history. It would make sense for you to organize these materials so if something should happen to you, people know, oh, these documents are beautifully organized. I'm talking about physical documents in this example. These documents are beautifully organized and preserved in this records box. It's not a pile of stuff. I can't tell you how many times people come to me, they've inherited just, an attic full of materials, and some within that attic, there might be some documents that are tremendously meaningful to the family, but it all looks like trash when you don't know where anything's organized. You can also hold materials for an heir. So you might know that in time you'd like to pass things down to a grandson, a granddaughter. You can sell or donate the materials. I think now more than ever, because we're kind of stuck more at home, space becomes a premium. So you might be thinking of, if you have something historically valuable, you might want to organize it because you want to sell it or donate it. Or in the case too, you might be downsizing, for example, and want to pass along materials. You can use these materials for a project. So let's say you're writing your memoirs. Well, a great place to start is with those primary sources of those family materials that you've kept over a period of time. So you want to organize it beforehand. You might also have an event, and this could be a virtual event or a physical future event, a reunion, a birthday, an anniversary. You want to gather these materials and organize them. Or I would hope, just because obviously you saw this webinar, there is some idea like you would like to organize the materials, and I really hope that at the end of our talk tonight, we'll have some not only tips to organize your materials, but that kind of motivation to get started. So first things first, before you do anything else, you want to get the materials out of harm's way. So if you have materials in a basement or an attic or in any place that is not the greatest, so anything that's near water pipes or windows or in direct sunlight, or where pests can gather, for example, you want to take those materials out of harm's way. What I suggest is to put, once things are organized, to put it in an interior closet, a bedroom closet, for example. That's not near the outside of your home or apartment. It's enclosed, it's in one space. I think what you'll also find is once you organize the materials, it takes up a lot smaller footprint of the material. So for example, I had a private client, I was in her living room, and there was just basically a pile of materials that she had gotten from her husband's family. And it was a tremendous amount of materials, but by organizing, we were able to shrink down that huge pile into about 6 records boxes that could be stacked up. So it was something that was taking up basically a small bathroom, and we were able to condense it down. So it's really surprising once things are organized in a safe manner, how little space they can take up while still being preserved. So there's things that we can, with all things in life, there's things that we can control and things that we can't control. So what we can preserve is, well, what we can't change is chemical and physical composition of materials. So everything that's organic is going to turn into dust, right? Ourselves and our materials. We can't control that process. If you have an old newspaper, because of the materials, it's going to, its chemical makeup, it's going to crumble and turn into dust over time. We can't control that process. But if we change how we store and handle materials, it'll last longer. And this is also the case of digital files as well. If you back up the materials, you have different copies of materials. And we can, if we put things, let's say, in preservation safe folders, we can keep those materials over a period of time. If you can make sure we get them out of harm's way, so take them out of our basement where there could be flooding, these materials can last longer. So handling is important with these materials. So I think we've all, throughout this pandemic, we've gotten our lesson on washing hands. So I think the cliche is that all materials have to be handled with white cotton gloves, which is not the case. If you have clean hands and you're nimble and careful about how you handle the materials, bare hands are often better than wearing cotton gloves. Cotton gloves can, make you more clumsy with working with materials, and you can actually hog them more that way. You can wear the type of gloves that you would get like in a doctor's office for things like very fragile photographs, because you wouldn't want to get your fingerprints on those materials. But even if you're handling photographs on the edges and you're being careful about how you handle them, bare hands are perfectly fine. If you're moving materials, you want to support fragile items. So if you have, for example, a very delicate pastel, you wouldn't necessarily handle it by its edges. You might have a support underneath, like a cardboard support to move it, that can give it a little bit of strength as it moves. And then, of course, if you're working with oversized or heavy items, you would ask for help to move those materials. So as you organize the materials, you want to take stock. And that's basically like a big pile of materials. So I always advise, if you have something like a dining room table or even a card table or a part of your home that's a flat surface, you can work with the materials there. I think a dining room table is perfect because you're not necessarily eating there every day. You can kind of use that to stage the materials. So you want to gather everything together. This is almost coming from, if you've read a Marie Kondo about, organizing your life. She has a good point where you gather everything together so you can really see what you have and look and see, what do you have? What are their conditions? Is anything in a really terrible or fragile state? And are there any danger signs? Things like pests. Do you see droppings? Do you see dirt? Do you see anything like active mold? That is something that you do not want to mess with, because mold is highly dangerous for humans and other animals to deal with. So you would isolate them in another part of your home. But for the most part, you're just kind of taking stock and seeing what you have. A lot of times people, if they have things that are in poor conditions, they try to repair the materials. And that's a totally logical thing to do, but it's it actually causes more harm. Amateur repair causes more harm. I've seen beautiful family documents that have like old tape. And if you see like the old Scotch tape, any type of adhesive is terrible for archival materials. It changes color, it can get really sticky, it can actually cause more damage to remove or to have the materials there. If you have something that you think needs repair, the best option is probably just leave it alone. If it's something that's incredibly valuable, historically valuable, or sentimentally valuable, or valuable, go to the experts. Find a conservator that can look at the materials and really properly preserve the materials in a way that's not going to do further damage. The thing about conservation is that it is all aspects of it are reversible. So something that would do major, that's why you wouldn't put adhesive on something, because that actually is more damaging to remove it. So the big question that I always get is what to keep. Now, keep in mind, as I said before, family collections are what's important to you. So ultimately, you're the decider on what to keep. And it's different than an archival repository that has a collection scope. So think about things that have importance, that are, historically important to you or your family. Things that are unique, things that cannot be replaced, that give a fascinating view of a historical moment. Sometimes things are just informational. So you might, for example, keep old newspapers. Now, these newspapers might not be in great condition, but the information within that newspaper article is important. Not necessarily the article itself, but the information it has. Things that are sentimental. Obviously, if anything that you have makes you feel really good, keep it. And also things that are interesting, that are kind of bizarre, you haven't seen before. An example I always talk about is my father served in the Navy in Vietnam, and he was like the rest and relaxation guide. So they would go into port, the Navy ship would go into port, and let's say, I think like Hong Kong, these little boats would come out and give these drink ticket books and every drink ticket book was saying that the third drink is free. So they knew that, here's some sailors that are on shore leave, let's get them liquored up. Now those materials, they are related to my father's service, but for me, we're keeping them because they're so weird and interesting. And And I love looking through these weird drink ticket books. The other thing that comes up, and I think with all family, anything related to family, is that there's really good feelings, and then there are also some yucky feelings that come up with family collections. Everyone has skeletons in their closet. So if you have materials that don't give you the warm fuzzies, that make you uncomfortable, or maybe from a family member that you don't want, or whatever reason, it's a gut feeling, right? Because ultimately you're the decider of this collection. If you're not really sure and you're getting kind of an emotional charge, I would say just put those materials aside and think about it. You don't have to make decisions right away. You might have materials that you come back in a month and decide, okay, I really want to keep this. Or I know a family member that might want these materials. I don't want them, but a family member might want them. Always revisit. You never want to necessarily throw things away in a fit of anger, or like, a cleaning fit. You want to be thoughtful when you do get rid of something, especially if you're unsure. So a big archival principle is thinking about things as groups, not as items. So identify the groups that already exist. So think about that dining room table. What are the big groups? If you could think like the piles that you have, are these the photographs from 1980 to 1999? Are these love letters between your parents? Are these postcards that you had from college? Are these travel photos that you took after retirement? There's all these different groups. If you get into the weeds when you start thinking about everything as an item, because it's going to be completely overwhelming. Even the smallest family collection might have, hundreds of items, which is just way too much. So think about things in big groups, and you get to decide on those categories. Something that trips people up, especially regarding photos, is going through and getting rid of the duplicate photos that you have. So, back where you could go to the photo mart, there would be those deals where you could get, every picture in triplicate. Well, people start going through and pulling out the duplicates because they only want one photo. Well, that's fine, but that's, in my professional opinion, that's a waste of time. Because who cares if you have duplicates of these photos? And if you do take the time, it's an incredible investment of time going through everything item by item, and you don't necessarily save much space. So if you find 100 duplicate photographs, I don't know how much time that would take, it wouldn't really make much of an impact on the collection. So don't even think about it. The only time you would really get into like getting rid of duplicates is, let's say you have, if you have like a publication, for example, where you have 50 different copies of it, you might only want to have 3, right? So you don't have to have the whole amount of that same book, but you could just have 3 copies of that item. So I guess in summary, what I'm trying to say is think about groups, don't get into the weeds of individual items. So an important part of talking about archives is we're going to talk about some archival principles, and I will definitely use an example to illustrate what I'm talking about. So one archival principle is provenance. So that's the history of ownership. So it includes the origin, the creation date, and the description of the object, and all records in a group connect to the creator. So the best way to describe this is that if you have your collection and your spouse's collection, of family history materials, you're not necessarily going to intermingle them, because this is your family and this is his or her family. And that's provenance. We think about collections as being by the creator, not necessarily, let's say, by the subject matter. And I will explain this in an example from my book that will illustrate this better than how I'm explaining it. Another archival concept is the idea of original order. So you want to keep records in the same order as when they were created. So that could be chronological, alphabetical, geographical, numerical, topical, whatever way you decide. So let's say you have family business records and someone organized things by alphabetically. Well, you would keep and maintain that order because that order tells us something about the collection, how they thought about their clients, for example, or how they label things. You wouldn't necessarily go in and organize things chronologically because you think that's a better way. It not only saves you time in organizing, but it also preserves that original order, and that gives us a lot of information. So I will give an example, and this is reading from my book, Creating Family Archives, which I'll talk about at the very end. So I am going to read a short section from it that will illustrate these concepts. Imagine that you have two collections of recipes, one from your maternal grandmother, Grace Chen, who is Chinese American, and one from your paternal grandmother, Maria Mercado, who's Puerto Rican. Grace's recipes are written neatly on index cards and organized alphabetically by food groups in a plastic recipe box. Maria's are written in English and Spanish on scraps of paper stuffed in envelopes and organized by the type of dish and by the event. Archivists would intermingle Grace's and Maria's collections in one group called recipes because the collection should be separated by their creators. Examining how each grandmother organizes her group provides knowledge about them, so you want to maintain that order. For instance, Grace has multiple recipes for noodles, noting which one was her husband's favorite. She has recipes to create meals for many people, which came from growing up in a large family. You can tell that she loves to bake based on the number of her recipes for cookies, pastries, and tarts. Maria's recipes tell a different story. She's more interested in organizing her recipes by dish. Her focus on events is a valuable insight too. Birthdays call for a special flan, and traditional Puerto Rican dishes are reserved for the holidays. Her bilingualism reflects the legacy of recipes that were passed down to her, and her use of paper scraps shows how frugal she was, having grown up poor. Her recipes don't need many ingredients and use inexpensive products. Her cooking technique is showcased in her recipes with many details. If you combined both collections or decided to organize the collections the same way, you would lose revealing information about your grandmothers. So that's an example of how we would keep the collection separate using provenance and then in their original order, because the collections themselves really reflect their creators. So how do you go about creating family archives and organizing the materials? I suggest always doing the physical before the digital and working on paper files before you go into photographs. Now, this is my personal opinion. It's not necessarily based on archival best practice, but this is what I found working with family collections and small organizations. I think, understandably, people want to digitize materials because it makes things incredibly accessible. But it helps to organize the physical stuff before you digitize it, because you have the physical stuff organized, and then as you digitize selections from that physical collection, that digital collection is going to reflect that physical collection. So if you organize things very well, you can start to digitize things. So you have two nicely organized collections, physical and digital, versus having a chaotic mess of the physical and then having digital where you can't find that original that it came from. I also suggest working with paper documents or text-based documents first before you move into something like photographs. The reason why is that paper documents, text-based documents, even if you don't necessarily know what it is, you can read it and tell, okay, this is my grandfather's resume. Versus photographs where there might not be any captions or any information. So you're digitizing things, or you're organizing things, so you don't really have anything that it's based on. So text-based documents can give you some information that can help you. Once that's organized, it can help you figure out what those photographs are. That's what I've seen in my career. So you want to arrange the materials. So you're skimming the contents. Of course, you're keeping the idea of provenance and original order in your mind. And you're thinking about, are there labels? Do these folders have labels? Are they accurate? You're noting formats, date ranges, and conditions of the materials, and seeing if there's gaps in the collections. Like, is there if you have business records up to 1944, what happened after that? Where's the gap of materials? And are there gems that you found? I think the great part in really getting into organizing your collections is that you're going to find amazing materials that you might not be aware of. And the more you work with the collections, the more you're going to know about the subject matter. And that's going to, I think, really have you find some gems within the collection. You want to remove the bad stuff. So these are things that are like, kryptonite for archivists. So anything like rubber bands, if you've seen a rubber band after a period of years, it's totally disgusting. It distorts the paper, it leaves residue, it's sticky. Ribbons, for example, were a lot of times used for decoration. They do look beautiful, but over time, that color, because they're made with kind of cheap dye, can spread on the materials. Staples and paper clips, depending on their age and their exposure to the moisture, can rust over time, so you want to remove those. I suggest you can get like a little mini spatula to help with the staples. Glue and tape is horrendous. Adhesive is like the worst thing for archivists. If you can safely remove these materials without damaging, please do so. If you do feel like things are being torn as you're removing it, just leave it as is. And the other thing is not to laminate the materials. I know that was especially popular years ago, but when you laminate materials, you're doing it because the idea is you want to preserve, especially like paper-based documents, but you basically create like a chemical sandwich where it's just the mixture of the plastic and the paper and aging over time is just kind of a nightmare. And it's not reversible. So don't laminate things in the first place. You want to get to good enough. Now, again, this is something that I think trips up non-archivists, because if you're the type of person that likes to organize, or perhaps you're not an organizing person, this is more difficult for you, you can kind of get in the mindset of having to be a perfectionist, that everything has to be perfectly organized, and that's simply not true. You want to organize your family materials in a way that you can find them relatively easily, but again, you're not going into that item level of materials. What I suggest is that as you're doing kind of a quick organization, resist the temptation to savor the documents and the photographs. I know this is really hard because I love to work through collections, and even if it's not my own family, for organizations or for private clients, it's very hard not to savor and want to research and look at all these materials and spend a lot of time with it. That can be actually pretty emotionally exhausting. What I suggest is just prioritize what you want to organize. So get things at a kind of a baseline organization. If you decide there's a part of your collection that you really want to spend some time with, that's perfectly fine, but you're prioritizing that. You're not getting everything to that level of detail. And also be realistic. Especially processing archival materials is especially intellectually exhausting, sometimes physically exhausting when I've worked in warehouses. So be realistic about what you can take on. I suggest working in small spurts of time over a period of days and months to get things organized. So manage your time. You want to write down your action items. What do you want to focus on of those materials? If you find yourself spending more time in one collection than the other, course correct, and use a time management system that works for you. I suggest, as I said, setting a timer for 20 minutes and working with these collections daily. And then when you're done, you're done. And even that small amount of time over, let's say a month, is going to have a tremendous impact on those collections without getting you completely overwhelmed. I think that's definitely something that happens with these materials. You get burned out by organizing them. And make this a fun project for yourself. So you should create an inventory. In the archives world, we call this a finding aid, which is just a fancy phrase for a guide. It can be something that could be like a Word document or a spreadsheet, and it gives you intellectual and physical control of the materials. So an inventory in this sense would be, let's say, a Word document, and you're saying box 1 contains correspondence from my parents from, this date range, right? And you know from that document that, okay, box 1 has that material. So you don't have to dig through lots of collections. I've worked with institutional archival facilities that have hundreds of boxes. And so when people are looking for materials, archivists are looking for materials, they're looking at this inventory, this finding aid. They're not looking through each box to find those materials. And it's really nice to be able to say, okay, box 5, folder 7 is exactly what I'm looking for, and it's just a matter of finding it. That's the real beauty, I think, that comes from organizing your family collections, is that the speed in which you can get those materials that you're looking for. An inventory also reduces handling. So you're not going through the materials, and it gives you, again, physical and intellectual control of your collections. So as you're organizing things, you're going to see that things are missing, and they might be missing because of family dynamics, or let's say a fire, or no one had the time, or it got lost in time. So as you're organizing your materials, you're going to see that certain stories are missing. So let's create some family archives. So talk to your family members. They might have some stories. It's a matter of picking up the phone, doing recording a Zoom session, having, asking a question and having them write back the answer. You can interview relatives. You can also create your own records. So I think the beauty of organizing family collections is that you can use that foundation to start to write your own story and your story up to now, which is pretty amazing. So archival supplies. What you're going to be looking for are boxes, folders, envelopes, sleeves. I found, there's a few, like Gaylord Archival, for example, is a great website that you can find any type of archival materials. I've also seen a small amount of archival material at the Container Store, if you have one nearby. It's usually in the back, kind of near the photo organization, but they have, a small amount of archival materials that is perfect if you have a small family collection. You want to avoid vagueness in terminology. So a lot of times, especially like in Amazon, you'll see things like archival quality or photo safe, which has no meaning. It really doesn't mean anything. What you're looking for are labels that say things like acid free. So we want folders that don't have acid in them. We want lignin free. That's another part of like paper-based products that we do not want because that causes aging. And then anything that's working with photographs, we want it to pass the PAT, which is the photograph activity test, which is, vendors send their materials to a laboratory. They do some advanced aging, God knows what they're doing. But they're able to say, okay, these photos are not shifting over time, and therefore it passes this test.
Excuse me, could you repeat again the first source that you recommended?
Gaylord Archival.
Gaylord, Gaylord, Archival?
Yes.
Thank you.
For storage, we're looking for vertical for standard size paper. So this, what you see on the screen, this is perfect for the folders that you have. If you have anything that's horizontal, like fragile and oversized, you're looking for horizontal type boxes. For large items, you might consider rolling them. And then you want the boxes to match the materials. It's almost like the Goldilocks rule, right? So if you have a box that's too small, you're going to be stuffing the materials and it's going to damage it. But if a box is too big, it's going to cause drooping. So this example that I have is actually for my own personal collection, and that's just enough folders that everything stands up straight and it's not too stuffed or too loose. So for digital collections, and this is maybe a whole other webinar in itself, but I'll give you kind of the postage stamp explanation. When you digitize materials, please keep the originals, because digital files are extremely fragile. We have no idea if the software or the computers or the files that are having the digital files are going to exist 10 years from now, 100 years from now. Digitizing files is wonderful for convenience and access, but it cannot replace the physical documents themselves. If you have digital collections, you want to save them into 3 places because, and typically that is in the cloud, in your computer, and then in an external hard drive. That way, let's say your laptop gets stolen. Your digital collection, if it's not backed up in any other place, it's gone and irretrievable. Digital files require proactive maintenance, so you do want to look at the files to make sure they're not corrupted over time. And if you have any doubt about the stability of the digital documents, I would say print it out. And this is like for like big archival repositories, they're not doing this because they have a lot of different means to back up the materials, to refresh and to migrate the files. But for family archives or personal collections, you can err on the side of printing out photographs. For example, I take a lot of photographs on my phone. I have them saved in all different places, but I also, use an app and send it to like my local drugstore to print out the physical copies too. That gives me peace of mind. So if anything should happen, I lose my phone or things don't get, backed up on the cloud, at least I have these physical copies of the photographs. So our talk today is based on my book called Creating Family Archives, a step-by-step guide for saving your memories for future generations. It goes into a tremendous amount of detail, and it'll be reversed, but this is what it looks like. It's a really, I created it for non-archivists. I wanted to give something that was easy to read, only the information that you need to know without getting too much into like archival theory or practice. And I created it because I really saw a need of people caring about their stuff, but not really finding guides to how to preserve things. And this book itself talks about all different how to do your project, but also specific types of formats. So how to save photo albums and scrapbooks, how to digitize things, how to do digital preservation, how to interpret photographs. I really wanted to give people basically I wanted to download things from like an archivist brain into a manual that people could use. And that's available on Amazon. I think it's affordable, like $24, very affordable. And then my website also has a little section that talks more about the book. And so with that, and I should say too, our talk tonight was like 60 miles per hour through the book. It gives a lot more detail. And I think this is the part of, in our remaining time, I love to answer questions as they come up in the chat.
So I just want to remind everyone, if you do have questions, feel free to enter them into the chat. This is a great opportunity for whatever you may have been working on. All right, so how do you suggest preserving old books that have binding issues? The book specifically is from the 1880s.
So books that have binding issues, so that would be something, like it's funny, I'm studying to be a book and manuscript appraiser, which is a long-term goal. So I'm like reading about all these fascinating books. So an old book like that has a fragile binding, you would most likely want to put it in some type of book box. So you can find in archival stores online, like Gaylord Archival, kind of book boxes that you can put the book in. It gives it some protection. You can also kind of build almost like a clam box that protects the book. You do want to make sure that as you put books, and there's a whole section in this book about protecting like bound materials. But you want to make sure that you're not adding added stress to the book. So you're not having it crammed into a bookshelf or having a doubling of the bookshelf. There's kind of air to breathe. You're not having it be stacked up where there's weight on that book itself. You're basically trying to preserve the book as is. If it is something that needs a conservator, you might look into what that might cost. But for the most part, you can put it in a protective archival box that's fit. It's almost like a little like a little casket or something for the book that helps protect it. So it's not, especially when you have a book binding that's loose, you don't want to have it snag on anything. So that's what I would suggest.
So there is a follow-up, Margot. The book already has loose pages. Any suggestions where to get it rebound, or is that not recommended?
You could get it rebound. I would look at, trying to think of I don't know the association offhand, but if you Google conservators, there's going to be fine book binding and conservators, very likely in the Greenwich area or New York City area, that can look to see if it's worth a rebinding. If that means, sometimes it means cutting off sections of the book, but someone could give you more guidance on that.
So from Linda, she's asking, how would you recommend approaching an overwhelming amount of family photos?
Vodka.
Yeah.
I think for an overwhelming amount, so I think the word is overwhelming, because I think especially family photos can be tremendous. So what I would say is gather them all together, really take stock on that dining room table, see what you have, see if there is already an order. A lot of family materials are just thrown in like any old box or a plastic carton. See if there's, especially if things were developed, if there's those, those photographic envelopes with the negatives inside. Use those as a way to kind of a grouping device. See if there's kind of natural groupings of materials. Then I would start to sort them out. So the good thing about photographs is usually their format can change over time. So something that's from the 50s can have that kind of deckled edge, for example, be black and white versus a 1980s Polaroid. So I might start, if there's not any of those groupings, I would start just putting together, not even looking at necessarily the subject matter, putting them together by format and getting those groups. And sometimes just by that format can be, okay, this is the role that, grandma took at, X amount of time. That can give you some sense. And then again, look at the grouping level, get to the highest, biggest category that you can, just so you have a sense of these groups. And then you can decide how much you want to get into the details. If you want to go through the images item by item. I would not necessarily suggest that because you will get overwhelmed. But what I found is that with groupings of photographs, if I say, these are my grandparents' photographs from the 1940s. If I put them in all one folder and I don't even look at them, I just know that that's the collection. If I have a specific photograph in mind, because I know that's in that folder, I can just spend, 5 minutes finding that photograph. Versus if I spent all that time before organizing everything to the minute level, that's going to be an hour, 2 hours, and I might not ever need to look at those photographs again. So I hope that's clear. I mean, really start at the big groups and then move down in time, and also approach it with a little, chunks of time. So 20 minutes a day that you're working on this. Don't let yourself get exhausted by this or overwhelmed. Just know that this is the amount of time it's going to take, and just do it. And you'd actually be surprised, especially when you get in the groove. I mean, this is me talking as a professional archivist, that I've been in like processing mode where I can process collections for like 8 hours a day. It's totally exhausting. But sometimes you get in, I know for me, I get in the zone where that's what I'm doing, and I can really organize the collection really quickly once they get into that zone.
Okay, we have a lot of questions coming in. We'll try to get to as many as possible. Alice asks, how would you suggest sorting through items that may not have personal value, but may be of historical significance? For example, brochures of Grossman resorts in the Catskills over several years with dinner menus.
Well, you would approach it as if it was sentimental. I mean, if it depends on you if it's worth keeping. You know, is there something, it has historical value? Maybe you just have a folder that's, you know, Grossman resorts, and you keep it as is. Maybe that's something that you organize it. It's a box of materials. You've spent maybe 20 minutes doing that. And maybe there's not like a sentimental reason, and then you want to prioritize other collections that you have.
Hillary asks, how would you preserve a silk mother of the bride dress from the 1950s?
With something like that, you can, if you go to archival supply companies, they have textile, like textile preservation kits. So typically it is a acid-free archival box, usually kind of like a flat box. It comes with tissue paper that is that's preservation quality, and you would put the, look to see if there's any stains on the dress or anything that like pests or anything. You might consider getting it cleaned beforehand, but if it's in okay condition, you could just keep it as is. You would lightly fold it, cover it, surround it with the tissue paper, make sure it's not, and also like have the tissue paper within the box so it's not jiggling. And then you have a beautiful keepsake box of the material. Silk especially can be very fragile over time.
Lindy asks, she says, we've switched from film to digital, small videos on camcorder to iPhone, etc., and it's become a very hodgepodge amount of stuff over time. How do you tackle this? And also, do you have some place you recommend to try and save digital formats that seem damaged? Home video negatives, etc.
Yeah, so especially with video. So if you have things that are magnetic tape based, you want to digitize that like now. Because that, for several reasons. One is that the age of the materials, it's only going to get worse over time. And also the playback materials. So people, places aren't creating VCRs anymore. So what's really interesting is that archival repositories, for example, have, not all of them, but a lot of the big ones have, like they go on eBay and get like old VCRs because they need the pieces. To be able to play back the materials. So I would suggest getting anything that's on magnetic tape to get it digitized right away. You can do that locally if there's a video digitization place. I know that there's some national chains, for example, like Legacy Box, which you throw everything in a box and you send it off to get digitized. I think that's an affordable option. For me, I wouldn't feel comfortable putting family items in a box, and I don't think their quality is the best, but you could research. I personally would go with local digitization vendors that have that home touch that can take care of it. As far as digital files, or digital AV files, this is a really interesting area for archivists because we're still trying to figure everything out. What I've personally done is I've gotten things digitized. I have backups, of course, on the cloud, on an external server, or external drive, my computer in the cloud. But then I also put it privately, the videos on YouTube, so I can access them easily, and I have another peace of mind of where to access them. But the main goal is to digitize them right away, because after a while they're not going to be usable, unfortunately.
So we have a couple of questions about photographs. Polly wants to know, actually this one is placing paper items in plastic sleeves in binders is okay, things like articles and letters.
It can be. So you would want to look, putting things in plastic enclosures is a nice way because you can actually see the materials. You can also put things in preservation quality like paper envelopes, but that means you have to take them in and out. Plastic, having the plastic protective sleeves is fine as long as they, if you have photographic material, if they pass the photographic activity test, or they are preservation quality. A lot of times people get stuff from, Office Max or Staples, and I don't know the preservation quality of those materials. So I would look for the enclosures that you could get in Archival Supply. You could get that at Container Store or things like Gaylord Archival, and you can get them in bulk. So you can save a little bit of money by having a volume of materials, but having them in binders is fine. The only thing would be perhaps dust of those binders. Sometimes binders can have like a protective jacket to put them in, so it just encloses it more from dirt and dust.
Nancy asks, she has a lot of boxes of family photo albums that are not in great shape, and she's wondering if you have any recommendations for scanning services.
Ooh, I know the company that I use is Hudson Archival. I use that for use it primarily for organizational materials or like organization archives. But they might, if you have a certain amount of volume, they might be able to do it for you. Again, I would look for, I find, in the Westchester area, every town seems to have like the camera framing, scanning, local shop that sells cameras and scanners and can digitize things. And I think that would be a great way to, I don't necessarily know in the Greenwich area, but I know throughout Westchester County, which I'm right near, there's like like Bronxville, for example, has a place like that. So I would suggest looking for a local vendor that can take care of that, that can have that real touch and feel of the photo albums.
Joe is asking, would you take family photos out of their photo albums in order to sort them? They have a lot of them, and I guess they're taking up space, and is it okay to remove the photos for sorting?
That is a great question. So you are the decider of that. So I'm going to think through the answer a bit. So the good thing about photographic albums is that hopefully someone organized in a certain way. There might be written captions that are next to the photograph that aren't part of the photograph itself. And the order that the images were organized might have meaning. It might not. It might simply be, we threw these photographs in an album. So ultimately, you would take a look at that album and see if it makes sense. The other thing to think about is with photographic albums is how damaging they are. So I still see them being sold. There's this thing called magnetic photo albums, which have that kind of sticky page. You put the photographs on, you put like a plastic, like see-through cover on top. And that's like, it's just the worst. It's really damaging for the photographs to have to be on that adhesive. So you could remove those photographs, or you could get like a preservation quality photographic album and like reproduce that photo album if that's meaningful for you. But if the photo album itself is purely a vehicle or like a container of the photographs and there's no informational meaning of those photographs, you could remove them. I would see if there's an order. I would try to maintain that order that was in the photographic album, because one is assuming that there's either an order or a chronological order that's important to have. And then you can condense down those photographs if that's meaningful for you. Again, that's a question of, you get to decide. But I wouldn't necessarily get rid of photo albums if they had a lot of information, and if there's information included in that photographic album that would be lost if you got rid of it.
All right. So I think these are the last three questions that we're going to address. Laura is asking, do you have any recommendations for children's artwork? Should I pick my favorites? Should I let the child pick their favorites? And then how should you scan them? I guess one in particular is large at 18 by 30 inches. So any recommendations?
Yeah, so, wow. I mean, there's so much artwork that, especially if a child is very creative. I would say things that look like they're significant for you and or the child. I would try to, if you know the years, like if you know the year or the event, or why this image was created, I would make sure to write that down in pencil, like on the corner, so you have that for later times. As far as scanning goes, a classic scanner, I think, can do, like an affordable scanner that's not a big deal, can do, I think, like a ledger size document. For bigger materials, you can photograph them. So when I've had clients that wanted kind of bigger size materials, I have like a photo box that I got from Amazon. It basically opens up, it's like a big light box, and you can put the materials inside and then use a camera to photograph it. It's nicely lit up, and that way it can document a larger type of image. But for the most part, you can scan many materials. You might also, if you don't want to do the light box approach, you can scan in pieces and then use a program like Photoshop, or I don't know if there's like a free equivalent of Photoshop to stitch together that image to make a larger one.
Susan asks, I have a quilt cover circa 1900, reputedly made by my great-grandmother. It attracted a lot of interest at the Historical Society's quilt show a few years ago, but neither my daughter nor I like the color orange. The dominant colors are blue, green, orange, and white. What to do?
I don't know. I mean, again, that's kind of the rights of ownership. You could obviously keep it in your family. Sounds like maybe you don't want to do that. You could perhaps see if it has historical significance, if it makes sense to reach out to a repository to donate it. That, I don't know if it's from a particular region, or if it has historical significance, if there's perhaps a textile museum that might be interested in it. That might require some research on your part. You might, if it's valuable, you might want to sell it. I mean, I think the archivist part of me is saying, no, you want to keep it, but I think it's also being realistic with family collections. Sometimes you just don't want the stuff and you've inherited it. So you can figure out a way to pass it on in a way that's meaningful. And especially if it has historical significance, a researcher might be looking for this. It might be really helpful to future researchers and current researchers as well.
What after the Historical Society's quilt show several years ago, I had it treated by a specialist who was involved in the show. And she removed I love this phrase, the inherent vice.
Yes.
Because some of the materials used in making the quilt were iron oxides. And so they were deteriorating. It's wonderful. When we lived in London, I hung it on a large stairway wall, but on the bed where you have small children and large dogs, it's not a good place to have a precious quilt.
Yeah, I love that phrase, inherent vice. There's all these great terminologies that archivists and conservators use. It makes our field sound so cool.
Yeah.
And our final question is from Lindy. When you have photos that have been damaged by the magnetic pages, should you leave it as is when you remove it, or is there something to treat them with so it doesn't deteriorate further?
Yeah, so magnetic, so it sounds like they're already removed, but I will give a guideline about how to actually remove them. So sometimes my baby album was on a magnetic album, but I guess the glue got so old that it wasn't sticky anymore. So for me, it was just a matter of just taking them off, which was nice. When the magnetic album, that adhesive is really sticky, what I suggest is using a bit of like dental floss and kind of taking, putting it under a corner and kind of moving it around to slowly remove that photograph. Sometimes you can put a hair dryer on the photograph to make the adhesive a little bit warmer and it's easier to work with. But it sounds like you already removed the photographs. To remove, it's hard to, I think if there is adhesive or like schmutz, not the technical word of the materials, I would see if you could remove it with physical means, like if it could be removed. I would not suggest doing anything like, I imagine there might be some type of chemical treatment that you could get to, like a Goo Gone or whatever this like goo adhesive remover. I would not suggest using that because you just never know. I would try to keep things as is, even if they're damaged. I'd keep them as is, and to make sure they're not, that adhesive or whatever it's on is not damaging the rest of the photographs. And that's the thing about photographs, especially color photographs. Over time, the colors shift. A magnetic album is like terrible for photographs, so there is the yellowing that happens on the edges. It's pretty terrible. But as long as you remove the materials from that damaging environment and keep them as is, so they cannot further damage themselves or other objects, you're good. You're as good as you can be.
All right, well, thank you so much for coming and joining us tonight, Margot. This was very informative. I hope everyone really enjoyed the talk and got some great tips. Margot has put her contact on the screen, so if you do have follow-up questions, you can reach her there. Also, her book is a wonderful resource. And I will say, Greenwich Historical Society has a fabulous archives as well. So we are thrilled that you could all join us today, and hopefully we'll be seeing your family collection soon. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.